The first morning Evelyn woke as the Duchess of Ashford. Sunlight streamed through windows 3 times the size of any she had known at Hartwell Manor. The bed beneath her was so soft she felt she might sink into it forever, and the silk sheets whispered against her skin like a promise of the life that now stretched before her. Yet despite the luxury surrounding her, despite Theodore's arm draped protectively across her waist as he slept beside her, Evelyn felt the first stirrings of unease. Being a duchess, she was discovering, was vastly different from imagining oneself as one. The past weeks had passed in a blur of formalities and introductions. The emergency wedding on Hartwell's Drive had been followed by a proper ceremony in London, witnessed by Theodore's closest associates and members of the aristocracy, who could not hide their curiosity about the mysterious bride. Evelyn had felt their scrutinizing gazes, heard the whispers that followed her through drawing rooms and ballrooms. The Duke of Ashford's scandalous marriage to his hostess's poor relation had become the season's most delicious gossip. Most had been polite to her face, their manners too refined for open discourtesy, but Evelyn had spent years reading the subtle language of disdain. She recognized it in the slight pauses before greetings, the appraising looks that traveled from her face to her gown, and back again, seeking flaws. She saw it in the way certain ladies turned away when she approached, claiming sudden need to speak with someone across the room. Theodore had been her constant shield during those first difficult weeks in London. He remained at her side during every social engagement, his presence a clear declaration that anyone who wished to slight his wife would answer to him personally. His fierce protectiveness had warmed her heart, even as it highlighted the precariousness of her position. She was a duchess because Theodore had made her one, but without his constant advocacy, how many of these people would acknowledge her at all? Now they had finally arrived at Ashford House in Hampshire, and Evelyn had hoped the change of scenery might ease her anxiety. The estate was magnificent beyond her wildest dreams, sprawling across countryside so lush and green it seemed painted by an artist's hand. The house itself was a masterpiece of architecture, its ancient stones bearing witness to centuries of Hawthorne family history. But with magnificence came responsibility, and Evelyn felt the weight of it pressing down upon her. Mrs. Dawson had been installed as head housekeeper, a comfort that made Evelyn's transition easier. The older woman had taken charge with quiet efficiency, introducing Evelyn to the extensive staff and helping her understand the complex hierarchy that governed the household. There were over 100 servants at Ashford House, each with specific duties and expectations. As Duchess, Evelyn was responsible for overseeing them all, for maintaining the smooth operation of an estate that functioned like a small village. "You're doing wonderfully, Your Grace, Mrs." Dawson assured her that first morning as they reviewed the household accounts in the Duchess's private study. "The staff admires your kindness and your genuine interest in their well-being. Give yourself time to learn the rhythms of the house." "Time," Evelyn repeated softly, staring at the ledgers spread before her. The numbers seemed to swim across the page, representing expenditures that exceeded everything her aunt had spent at Hartwell Manor in an entire year. "Mrs. Dawson, what if I fail at this? What if I prove myself unequal to the position Theodore has given me?" The older woman's expression softened with compassion. "You have never failed at anything you set your mind to, child. You managed Hartwell Manor's accounts for years, easing my burdens without complaint. This is merely a larger scale of the same work. Besides," she added with a knowing smile, "His Grace would never have chosen a woman he thought incapable. He saw your strength and intelligence from that first night in the kitchen. Trust his judgment and trust yourself." Evelyn wanted to believe those words, wanted to embrace the confidence Mrs. Dawson placed in her, but doubt had been her companion too long to be easily dismissed. The first true test of her position came 3 days after their arrival at Ashford House. Theodore's aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Pensington, announced her intention to visit. She was his father's sister, a formidable woman known throughout society for her sharp wit and sharper tongue. She had sent her congratulations on Theodore's marriage, but those congratulations had been notably brief and devoid of warmth. "Aunt Philippa can be rather overwhelming," Theodore warned as they prepared for her arrival. He adjusted his cravat in the mirror, his expression showing the first real anxiety Evelyn had seen in him. "She has very particular ideas about propriety and the responsibilities of our station. But you must remember, Evelyn, that you are the Duchess of Ashford now. You outrank her in precedence, and you need not tolerate any condescension." "Theodore, she is your family," Evelyn replied quietly. "I do not wish to create conflict between you." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "You are my family now, first and foremost. My wife, my partner, the woman I love above all others. Aunt Philippa will accept you because she must, and because once she knows you, she will see what I see. Someone extraordinary." But when the Dowager Duchess arrived in a magnificent carriage bearing her late husband's coat of arms, Evelyn's courage wavered. Philippa Cavendish was a tall woman despite her advanced years, her posture military straight, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken her maid hours to achieve. She wore black silk despite the summer warmth, still observing mourning for her husband, who had died 2 years prior. Her eyes, the same grey as Theodore's, swept over Ashford House's entrance hall with proprietary familiarity before settling on Evelyn with an intensity that felt like judgment itself. "So," she said without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of decades spent commanding respect, "you are the young woman who has caused such a sensation. Come here, child, and let me look at you properly." Evelyn stepped forward, painfully conscious of the watching servants, of Theodore's tension beside her. She curtsied deeply, as protocol demanded when greeting a woman of the Dowager's rank and relation. "Your Grace, welcome to Ashford House. We are honored by your visit." "Pretty manners," Philippa observed, circling Evelyn like a general inspecting troops. Theodore always did have an eye for beauty. But running a ducal household requires more than a pleasing face and graceful curtsy. "Tell me, how many servants does Ashford House employ?" The question came sharp as a blade. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm, but she met the Dowager's gaze steadily. 143, Your Grace, including the gamekeeper, stablemaster, and head gardener, who maintain separate residences on the estate." Philippa's eyebrows rose fractionally. "And what is the annual expenditure for household maintenance?" "Approximately £12,000, Evelyn replied, grateful that she had studied the accounts so thoroughly with Mrs. Dawson, though that figure fluctuates based on necessary repairs and extraordinary expenses. The rose garden requires replanting every 3 years, Philippa continued, clearly determined to find some gap in Evelyn's knowledge. "Do you know which variety has proven most successful in Hampshire's soil?" "The Damascus roses flourish particularly well," Evelyn said quietly, "though I understand Your Grace introduced a hybrid variety during your time as Duchess that combined the Damascus's hardiness with the superior scent of the Gallica roses. Mrs. Dawson mentioned it specifically when she showed me the gardens." For the first time, something shifted in Philippa's expression. It was not quite approval, but perhaps the beginning of reassessment. "You have done your research." "I am attempting to learn my duties, Your Grace. I wish to honor the position Theodore has given me, and the legacy of the duchesses who came before." Philippa studied her for another long moment, then turned to Theodore. "We shall take tea in the drawing room. I wish to speak with your wife privately." Theodore's hand moved to the small of Evelyn's back, a gesture of support. "Aunt Philippa, privately, Theodore," the Dowager repeated firmly, "unless you believe your Duchess incapable of entertaining an old woman for an hour without your protection." It was a challenge, and everyone present recognized it as such. Evelyn touched Theodore's arm gently. "I would be honored to take tea with your aunt, husband. Please do not concern yourself." His grey eyes searched her face, looking for signs of distress. Finding only determination, he nodded slowly. "Very well. I shall be in the library should you have need of me." The emphasis on the final words was clear. If Philippa overstepped, he would intervene regardless of propriety. The drawing room had been prepared with the finest china and an elaborate tea service. Evelyn poured with hands that trembled only slightly, grateful for the countless times she had observed such rituals at Hartwell Manor, even if she had never been permitted to participate. She prepared Philippa's cup exactly as the Dowager preferred it, information Mrs. Dawson had provided, along with a dozen other useful details about Theodore's formidable aunt. "You are frightened of me," Philippa observed once they were settled, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "I am concerned about disappointing you," Evelyn corrected carefully. "You are important to Theodore, and your opinion matters to him. I wish to prove myself worthy of the position I now hold." "Worthy," Philippa repeated, setting down her cup with a soft click. "An interesting choice of words. Tell me, Miss Ashford, forgive me, Your Grace, what do you believe makes a woman worthy of being a duchess?" It was a trap, Evelyn sensed, though she could not quite see its mechanism. She considered her response carefully. "I do not know that I am qualified to answer such a question, having been a duchess for less than a month. But I believe worthiness comes from how one treats those in their care, from using one's position to effect good rather than simply enjoying its privileges. A duchess has power and resources that most can only dream of. Surely the worthiness lies in how she employs those advantages." Philippa's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been surprise. A philosophical answer. But philosophy rarely survives contact with reality. "You came from poverty, from illegitimacy, from a position little better than servitude. Do you truly believe you can navigate the complexities of aristocratic society? That you can withstand the scrutiny and judgment that will follow you for years to come?" The words struck at Evelyn's deepest fears, but she refused to flinch. "I believe I must try, Your Grace. Theodore chose me knowing my origins. He believes me capable, and I would rather fail attempting to meet his expectations than succeed at never trying at all." "Theodore is besotted," Philippa said bluntly. "Love makes fools of even the wisest men. He sees you through the lens of his affection and may be blind to your limitations." "Perhaps," Evelyn acknowledged, her voice steady despite the pain those words caused. "But I am not blind to them, Your Grace. I know I have much to learn. I know society will judge me harshly, that many will never accept me regardless of my efforts. But I also know that I love your nephew with my whole heart, and I will spend the rest of my life striving to be the partner he deserves." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably. Philippa sipped her tea, her expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, her lips curved into something almost resembling a smile. "You have courage, child. More than I expected when I heard of Theodore's scandalous marriage. I came here prepared to find a pretty fool who had somehow ensnared my nephew with feminine wiles. Instead, I find a woman who understands the magnitude of what she has undertaken and is determined to rise to the challenge." She leaned forward slightly. "You will need that courage, Your Grace. There are those in society who will never forgive Theodore for marrying beneath his station. They will seek to wound him through you, to prove that his choice was mistaken. You must be strong enough to withstand their attacks without allowing bitterness to poison your spirit." "I have weathered contempt before," Evelyn replied quietly. "I survived years of it at Hartwell Manor." "Survived, yes," Philippa agreed. "But you were powerless then, invisible. Now you are highly visible, and your failures will be public. That is a different sort of trial entirely." She set down her cup with finality. "However, you shall not face it entirely alone. I have decided to sponsor your formal introduction to society. With my backing, the more venomous gossips will be forced to restrain themselves, at least publicly." Evelyn stared at her, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. "Your Grace, Thank you. I do not know what to say." "Say nothing," Philippa advised. "Simply prove me right to offer my support. Now then, we have much work ahead of us. Your wardrobe will need expanding. Theodore has done well, but you require more formal gowns for the upcoming season. You must learn the intricacies of precedence and protocol, which families are in favor and which are not, who may be safely slighted and who must be courted. And most importantly," she added with sudden intensity, "you must learn to project confidence even when you feel none. The moment society senses uncertainty, they will attack like wolves scenting wounded prey." The rest of Philippa's visit passed in a whirlwind of instruction. The Dowager proved a demanding but effective teacher, drilling Evelyn on the complex rules governing aristocratic interaction. She identified gaps in Evelyn's education and immediately set about filling them, summoning tutors to teach dancing, deportment, and the subtle arts of conversation that were expected of a duchess. Theodore watched these intensive lessons with mixed feelings. He was grateful for his aunt's support, but troubled by the pressure being placed on Evelyn's shoulders. "You need not become someone else to please society," he told her one evening as they prepared for bed. "I fell in love with you exactly as you were, Evelyn. Do not lose yourself trying to meet others' expectations." "I am not losing myself," Evelyn assured him, though she was not entirely certain that was true. "I am simply learning to navigate a world that is still foreign to me. Your aunt is helping me avoid the worst mistakes I might otherwise make." "My aunt is formidable," Theodore agreed, pulling Evelyn into his arms, "but she can also be ruthless in her determination to maintain the family's status. Promise me you will tell me if her demands become too much." Evelyn rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I promise. But Theodore, I want to succeed at this, not for society's approval, but for you. You risked everything to marry me. Your reputation, your standing, perhaps even your relationships with family and friends. I will not have people say you made a terrible mistake." "You could never be a mistake," Theodore said fiercely, tipping her face up to meet his gaze. "You are the best decision I ever made. Do you understand that? Nothing society thinks or says will ever change that truth." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love alone would be sufficient. But in the quiet moments when Theodore was occupied with estate business or meeting with his steward, doubt crept back in. She would wander the vast halls of Ashford House, feeling small and out of place among the priceless artwork and furniture that spoke of centuries of Hawthorne family history. Every portrait she passed seemed to judge her, duchess after duchess, all born to the role, all possessing the breeding and education that she lacked. Mrs. Dawson found her one afternoon standing before a particular portrait, that of Theodore's grandmother, a legendary beauty who had been sought by half the eligible men in England before choosing Theodore's grandfather. "You're comparing yourself unfavorably," Mrs. Dawson observed gently. "She looks so confident," Evelyn murmured, "so certain of her place in the world. I wonder if she ever doubted herself, ever felt as though she did not belong." "Every woman doubts herself at times," Mrs. Dawson replied. "But child, you are focusing on the wrong things. These women in the portraits, for all their breeding and beauty, did not face what you face. They stepped into roles prepared for them from birth. You are forging your own path, creating your own version of what a duchess should be. That requires far more courage than simply following an established pattern." "Or perhaps it reveals my presumption," Evelyn said softly. "Perhaps I should have been content with Theodore's love and not aspired to positions I was never meant to fill." Mrs. Dawson's expression turned stern. "Do you love him?" "With all my heart." "Then you belong exactly where you are." "Love is not presumptuous, Evelyn. It is the most honest thing in this world of calculation and arrangement. You did not scheme your way into this position. Theodore chose you freely, knowing full well the complications it would create. Honor that choice by being the best duchess you can be, but do not torture yourself trying to become someone you are not." The conversation helped restore some of Evelyn's equilibrium. She threw herself into her studies with renewed determination, memorizing the intricate rules of precedence that governed who entered a room first, who took which seat at dinner, whose invitation must be accepted, and whose might be politely declined. She practiced her dancing until her feet ached, determined to move with the effortless grace expected of a woman of her station. She read extensively about the Hawthorne family history, learning the names and accomplishments of Theodore's ancestors, so she might speak knowledgeably about the legacy she had married into. Theodore noticed her dedication and privately worried that she was pushing herself too hard, but he also recognized that Evelyn needed to feel confident in her abilities, that this intense preparation was her way of coping with the enormous changes in her life. So he supported her efforts while ensuring she did not neglect her health or their relationship. He insisted on daily walks through the estate, during which they could be simply Theodore and Evelyn rather than Duke and Duchess. He read to her in the evenings, providing respite from the constant studying, and at night he made love to her with a tenderness that reassured her she was valued for herself, not for how perfectly she could perform the role of Duchess. It was during one of their evening walks, 6 weeks after their arrival at Ashford House, that the first real threat to their happiness manifested. A letter arrived by special courier, addressed to the Duke of Ashford in an elegant hand that Theodore recognized immediately. His expression darkened as he read its contents, and Evelyn felt a chill of premonition. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Theodore looked up from the letter, frustration evident in every line of his face. "It is from Lady Peaton. She is threatening legal action to have our marriage annulled." Evelyn's world tilted sickeningly. "Annulled? On what grounds?" "She claims I coerced you, that the marriage was contracted under duress while you were still under her guardianship." Theodore's voice was tight with anger. "She argues that as your legal guardian, her consent was required for any marriage, and that my actions constituted kidnapping and forced marriage. It is absolute nonsense, of course, but she has apparently found a solicitor willing to bring the case before a magistrate." "Can she truly do this?" Evelyn whispered, her hands clenching the fabric of her skirt. "Can she destroy what we have built?" "She can try," Theodore replied grimly, "but I will not allow it. We have witnesses to the fact that you consented freely to our marriage. Father Benedict will testify to your state of mind during the ceremony. The magistrate who reviewed the emergency petition will confirm that you were facing coercion from Lady Peaton, not from me. This is desperation on your aunt's part, a final attempt to punish you for daring to escape her control." But despite his confident words, Evelyn could see concern in Theodore's eyes. Legal proceedings, even baseless ones, could create scandal, and scandal, once attached to a name, was extraordinarily difficult to remove. "Perhaps I should speak with her," Evelyn suggested. "Perhaps if I explain that I am content, that I chose this marriage freely, she might withdraw her complaint." "Absolutely not," Theodore said immediately. "I will not have you subjected to that woman's venom again. She had years to show you kindness and chose cruelty instead. She has forfeited any right to your consideration. But if she succeeds, she will not succeed," Theodore interrupted, pulling Evelyn into his arms. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," Evelyn replied without hesitation. "Then trust that I will protect what is ours. Your aunt miscalculates if she believes a duke's marriage can be dissolved because she wishes it so. I have resources and influence that far exceed hers. This legal challenge will fail, and when it does, Lady Peaton will find herself facing consequences for bringing false accusations against a peer of the realm." Evelyn wanted to share his certainty, but fear had taken root in her heart. She had been so close to losing everything once before, saved only by Theodore's dramatic intervention. What if this time his protection proved insufficient? What if the law which had given Lady Peaton such power over her for so many years now gave her the power to destroy Evelyn's marriage? That night, sleep eluded her entirely. She lay awake listening to Theodore's steady breathing, memorizing the feel of his arm around her waist, the warmth of his body against hers. If the marriage were annulled, all of this would vanish like morning mist. She would be returned to Lady Peaton's custody, or perhaps declared a ward of the court. Either way, she would lose Theodore, lose this life she had only just begun to build, lose everything that made existence bearable. The terror of that possibility was so acute, it made her physically ill. She slipped from bed, careful not to wake Theodore, and made her way to the washroom where she was violently sick. When the spasms finally subsided, she sank onto the cool tile floor, pressing her forehead against her knees and fighting for composure. "Evelyn." She looked up to find Theodore in the doorway, his face creased with concern. He moved immediately to her side, gathering her into his arms despite her protests. "You're unwell. I shall send for the physician immediately." "No," Evelyn managed. "It is not illness, Theodore. It is fear." He held her closer, his hand stroking her hair with infinite gentleness. "You are afraid of losing me." "I am afraid of losing everything," she whispered. "This life, this happiness, you. Theodore, I cannot bear the thought of being sent back, of having all of this torn away. It would destroy me." "Then it is fortunate," Theodore said quietly, "that I have no intention of allowing such a thing to happen. Evelyn, look at me." When she raised her tear-stained face to his expression was fierce with determination. "I swore before God and witnesses to be your husband. That vow is not negotiable, not subject to your aunt's approval or society's judgment or any magistrate's ruling. You are mine as I am yours, and nothing will change that truth. Do you understand? I want to believe you, Evelyn said brokenly, but I have learned that wanting something does not make it so. I wanted my father to acknowledge me. I wanted my aunt to show me kindness. I wanted to be more than a burden and a shame. None of those wants changed reality. This is different, Theodore insisted, because this time you are not alone in your wanting. I stand with you, Evelyn. My power, my position, my fortune, all of it is yours to command, and I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure our marriage remains inviolate. He carried her back to their bed, tucking her against his side and holding her until her trembling subsided. They lay together in the darkness, neither sleeping, both grappling with the threat that had suddenly emerged to menace their happiness. "Tell me about the day you decided to marry me," Evelyn requested softly. "Help me remember that this is real, that what we share is worth fighting for." Theodore's arms tightened around her. "I decided to marry you the moment you looked into my eyes in that kitchen. Everything that followed, the conversation in the garden, the emergency petition, the wedding on your aunt's drive, those were simply the outworking of a choice my heart had already made. I saw you, Evelyn, not the servant or the bastard niece or any of the labels society had attached to you. I saw a woman of extraordinary courage and grace, someone who had survived circumstances that would have broken most people. And I knew with absolute certainty that I would count myself fortunate beyond measure if you would consent to be my wife." "I felt so unworthy," Evelyn confessed. "I kept waiting for you to realize your mistake, to see me as my aunt saw me, as nothing, nobody." "Then your aunt is a fool," Theodore said flatly. "You are everything, Evelyn. You are intelligent and compassionate and stronger than you know. These past weeks, watching you study and learn and gradually claim your place as Duchess, I have fallen more deeply in love with you every single day. You were never unworthy. Society's definitions of worth are arbitrary and cruel. True worth lies in character, in how one treats others, in the courage to be kind even when kindness has not been shown to you. By those measures, you are worth 1,000 women born to privilege who have never known hardship or struggle." His words were a balm to her frightened heart. Evelyn pressed closer to him, drawing strength from his certainty when her own had faltered. "What will we do?" she asked. "How do we fight this?" "We fight with truth," Theodore replied. "Tomorrow, I shall meet with my solicitors and begin preparing our defense. We have multiple witnesses who can testify to your consent, to your aunt's mistreatment, to the circumstances that necessitated our urgent marriage. We will present such overwhelming evidence that the magistrate will have no choice but to dismiss Lady Peaton's petition as the malicious fiction it is. And if that is not enough, then we will appeal to higher courts, all the way to the House of Lords if necessary. I am a peer of the realm, Evelyn. That grants us certain advantages in legal proceedings, but it will not come to that. Your aunt's case is built on lies and vindictiveness. The truth will prevail." Evelyn wanted desperately to believe him, but she had learned young that the world was rarely fair, that truth did not always triumph over power and influence. Lady Peaton might lack Theodore's resources, but she possessed spite in abundance, and spite could be a formidable weapon. The weeks that followed tested Evelyn's newfound strength to its limits. Theodore's solicitors began gathering evidence and preparing documents, but legal proceedings moved with glacial slowness. Meanwhile, word of Lady Peaton's challenge spread through society like wildfire. Evelyn felt the change immediately during their next visit to London for a charity function Philippa had insisted they attend. Where before she had faced skepticism and barely concealed disdain, now she encountered open hostility. Ladies who had previously offered cool politeness now cut her directly, turning away when she approached. Gentlemen regarded her with speculation that made her skin crawl, as though her marriage's legitimacy being questioned rendered her somehow available again. The gossip was vicious and unrelenting. "They say she trapped the Duke with feminine wiles, then used his infatuation to escape her rightful guardian. Poor Lady Peaton, showing charity to her unfortunate niece only to have it rewarded with such betrayal. I always said Ashford was too soft-hearted. Now look where his impulsive nature has led him, married to a woman who may not even legally be his wife." The whispers followed Evelyn everywhere. She maintained her composure through sheer force of will, her training with Philippa serving her well. She smiled when appropriate, conversed when required, and gave no visible sign that each barbed comment struck deep. But inside, she was bleeding. Theodore noticed despite her efforts to hide it. He cut their evening short, citing Evelyn's fatigue, and bundled her into their carriage with protective fury radiating from every line of his body. "I should call out every man who looked at you with such disrespect," he growled as they rode through London streets. "Challenge them all to duels and shoot them one by one." "That would only create more scandal," Evelyn replied wearily, "and prove them right about your impulsive nature. I do not care what they think." "But I do," Evelyn admitted softly. "Theodore, every cruel word they speak reflects on you. They are saying you were foolish to marry me, that I have damaged your reputation and standing. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps you would have been better served by—" "Stop!" Theodore's voice cracked like a whip. "Do not finish that sentence. Do not give those vipers the satisfaction of making you doubt what we have built together." He pulled her into his arms, his embrace fierce enough to hurt. "I knew there would be opposition when I chose to marry you. I knew society would judge us harshly, but I also knew that I would rather face their condemnation with you by my side than enjoy their approval alone. That calculation has not changed, Evelyn. Not one bit." She clung to him, drawing strength from his unwavering support. But privately, she wondered how long even Theodore's determination could withstand the constant assault. He was fighting for her on so many fronts simultaneously, against her aunt's legal challenge, against society's judgment, against the whispers that followed them everywhere. How long before the weight of it all became too much? How long before he began to regret the scandalous choice that had brought such trouble to his door? Those fears multiplied exponentially when, 3 days later, another blow fell. The blow came in the form of a visit from Theodore's cousin, Lord Edmund Hawthorne, who arrived at Ashford House unannounced on a grey morning that matched Evelyn's mood perfectly. Edmund was the son of Theodore's uncle, a man in his late 30s who had always resented that the dukedom had passed to Theodore's line rather than his own. He was handsome in a dissolute way, his face bearing the marks of too much drink and too many late nights in London's gambling hells. Evelyn was in the morning room reviewing menus with the cook when the butler announced Lord Edmund's arrival. She felt a prickle of unease at the man's name, remembering Theodore's brief mention of a cousin who had caused trouble in the past, but courtesy demanded she receive him, particularly as Theodore was currently out riding the estate with his steward. Edmund swept into the morning room with the careless confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. His eyes travelled over Evelyn with an appraisal that made her feel exposed despite her modest day dress. "So you are the famous Duchess of Ashford," he drawled, executing a bow that somehow managed to be both technically correct and subtly mocking. "The woman who has set London society on its ear. I confess, cousin, I had to see for myself what sort of creature could inspire Theodore to such reckless behaviour." "Lord Edmund," Evelyn replied coolly, rising to curtsy. "I regret that the Duke is not currently at home. Shall I send for him? I believe he is inspecting the tenant farms and could return within the hour." "No need," Edmund said, settling himself into a chair without waiting for invitation. "It is you I came to see, Your Grace. I thought we might have a little conversation, just the two of us, family to family, as it were." The way he emphasized family suggested he found the connection dubious at best. Evelyn resumed her seat, keeping her expression carefully neutral. "I am happy to receive you, Lord Edmund, though I confess I am uncertain what we might discuss that would require the Duke's absence." "Pragmatic matters," Edmund replied, accepting the tea she poured with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You see, Your Grace, I am concerned about my cousin's well-being. Theodore has always been somewhat idealistic, prone to romantic notions that cloud his judgment. This marriage of his, while no doubt satisfying to his sentimental nature, has created significant problems for the family." "What sort of problems?" Evelyn asked quietly, though she could already sense where this conversation was leading. "Legal problems, for one," Edmund said, sipping his tea with exaggerated delicacy. "This petition your aunt has filed. It raises uncomfortable questions about the validity of the marriage, questions that could have far-reaching consequences. If the marriage were declared invalid, any children born of the union would be illegitimate. The succession would be thrown into chaos. The family's reputation would suffer irreparable damage. "The marriage will not be declared invalid," Evelyn said firmly. "We have ample evidence of my consent and of the circumstances that necessitated our urgent wedding." "Perhaps," Edmund acknowledged, "but even the appearance of impropriety is damaging. Society thrives on scandal. Your Grace and your marriage has provided enough fodder for gossip to last years. Already I hear whispers that Theodore's judgment has been compromised, that he is unfit to manage the ducal responsibilities if he can be so easily swayed by a pretty face." Each word was calculated to wound, and they found their marks with precision. Evelyn felt her composure beginning to crack, but she refused to give Edmund the satisfaction of seeing her distress. "If you have come merely to relay hurtful gossip, Lord Edmund, I must ask you to leave. I have duties to attend to." "I have come to offer you a solution," Edmund said, leaning forward with sudden intensity. "One that would spare both you and Theodore further humiliation. Annul the marriage yourself. Claim coercion or mistake or whatever legal fiction your solicitors recommend. Do it before the magistrate rules on your aunt's petition. Take control of the narrative." Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. "You are suggesting I destroy my own marriage to spare Theodore embarrassment?" "I am suggesting you love him enough to release him," Edmund corrected. "Look at what this union has cost him already. His standing in society, his family's respect, potentially even his position in Parliament. Do you truly believe your happiness is worth such sacrifices? Or are you simply too selfish to acknowledge the damage you have done?" The accusation struck at Evelyn's deepest insecurities, the fears that haunted her sleepless nights. She had asked herself these same questions 1,000 times. Was her love for Theodore justified when it brought him such trouble? Was she being selfish in clinging to a marriage that society deemed inappropriate? But even as doubt whispered its seductive poison, another voice rose to answer it. Theodore's voice, speaking words of love and commitment, reminding her of the choice they had made together. "I will not annul my marriage," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Theodore and I chose each other freely, with full knowledge of the difficulties we would face. I will not betray that choice because society finds it inconvenient." Edmund's expression hardened. "Then you are either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. I suspect the latter. You come from nothing, Your Grace. You have no understanding of what is truly at stake here. The Hawthorne family has maintained its position and power for centuries through careful marriages and strategic alliances. You threaten that legacy by introducing inferior blood into our line." "Inferior blood," Evelyn repeated, her temper finally sparking to life. "How convenient that you measure worth by accidents of birth rather than character or conduct. By your standards, Lord Edmund, I should bow to your superiority despite the fact that your own reputation is that of a wastrel and a gambler who has squandered his inheritance on vices too numerous to catalogue." Edmund's face flushed an ugly red. "You forget yourself, madam. Whatever legal technicality made you a duchess, you remain what you have always been, a base-born bastard with ideas above your station." "And you remain what you have always been," Evelyn replied, rising to her full height with a composure that would have made Philippa proud. "A bitter, small-minded man who resents his cousin's happiness because it highlights the emptiness of your own existence. This conversation is over, Lord Edmund. I must ask you to leave Ashford House immediately." "Theodore will tire of you eventually," Edmund said, standing with deliberate slowness. "When the novelty of your humble origins wears thin, when he realizes what his impulsive marriage has truly cost him, he will come to resent the chains you have placed upon him. And when that day comes, I will be waiting to help clean up the mess." "You will be waiting in vain," Evelyn said coldly. "Now leave before I have the footman escort you from the premises." Edmund's smile was poisonous. "As you wish, Your Grace, but know this, your aunt's petition is only the beginning. There are others in the family who share my concerns about this marriage. We will not stand by and watch centuries of Hawthorne legacy destroyed by a servant girl's delusions of grandeur." He bowed mockingly and strode from the room, leaving Evelyn trembling with a volatile mixture of anger and fear. She sank back into her chair, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to still them. Mrs. Dawson found her there 20 minutes later, still sitting in stunned silence. "Your Grace, the cook is asking about the menus for next week's dinner party. Shall I tell her you will review them later?" Evelyn looked up and Mrs. Dawson's expression immediately shifted to alarm at whatever she saw in Evelyn's face. "What has happened? Has there been more news about Lady Peaton's petition?" "Worse," Evelyn said hoarsely. "Theodore's own family is turning against us, against me." She recounted Edmund's visit, his cruel words and his demand that she annul the marriage. Mrs. Dawson listened with growing fury, her weathered hands clenching into fists. "That vile, contemptible man," she said when Evelyn finished. "He has no authority to make such demands. His Grace will be apoplectic when he learns of this." "That is precisely what concerns me," Evelyn admitted. "Theodore is already fighting so many battles on my behalf. If his own family becomes his enemy, if he is forced to choose between his heritage and his wife, how can our marriage possibly survive such strain?" "The same way it has survived everything else," Mrs. Dawson said firmly. "With love, determination, and refusal to let small-minded people dictate your choices. Child, listen to me. Edmund is a jealous, spiteful creature who has always resented Theodore's position. His words are designed to hurt and unsettle you. Do not give him that power." "But what if he is right?" Evelyn whispered. "What if I am being selfish? Clinging to Theodore when releasing him would serve him better?" "Is that truly what you believe?" Mrs. Dawson demanded. "Or is that fear talking? Because I see the way His Grace looks at you, the way his entire countenance brightens when you enter a room. That man loves you with every fibre of his being. To leave him now, claiming it is for his own good, would be the cruelest thing you could do." Before Evelyn could respond, they heard the sound of hoofbeats on the drive, Theodore returning from his ride. Evelyn rose quickly, attempting to compose herself, but she knew her distress would be immediately apparent to her husband. Indeed, Theodore took one look at her face as he entered the morning room and demanded to know what was wrong. When she reluctantly recounted Edmund's visit, his expression transformed into something dangerous. "He came to my house," Theodore said, his voice deadly quiet, "and dared to suggest you annul our marriage. He threatened and insulted you under my own roof." "Theodore, please do not make this worse by confronting him," Evelyn pleaded. "He wants to provoke you, to create more scandal." "He has succeeded in provoking me," Theodore replied grimly. "But I will not give him the satisfaction of violence, however much he deserves it. No, I shall handle this differently." He moved to his desk and began writing with swift, angry strokes. "Edmund has overstepped every boundary of propriety and family loyalty. He will learn the consequences of threatening what is mine." The letter he penned was addressed to every member of the extended Hawthorne family, a declaration of unwavering support for his marriage and a clear warning that anyone who challenged it would find themselves cut off from the family entirely. It was a bold move, one that risked alienating relatives whose support might have been valuable in fighting Lady Peaton's petition. But Theodore was past caring about political maneuvering. His protective fury on Evelyn's behalf was both touching and terrifying. She loved him for his fierce defense, but she also worried about the bridges he was burning in her name. The response to Theodore's letter came swiftly and was mixed. Some family members expressed support, assuring Theodore that they stood with him regardless of society's judgment. Others maintained a careful silence that spoke volumes about their disapproval, and a handful, led by Edmund, responded with barely veiled hostility, suggesting that Theodore's obsession with his unsuitable wife had blinded him to his responsibilities. The rift within the Hawthorne family became public knowledge, adding fuel to the scandal already burning through London society. Evelyn found herself at the center of a maelstrom, blamed by some for destroying family unity, praised by others for standing firm against aristocratic prejudice. The emotional toll was immense. Evelyn began experiencing frequent headaches and bouts of nausea that she attributed to stress. She grew pale and withdrawn despite Theodore's constant attempts to bolster her spirits. Even Philippa's continued support could not entirely shield her from the relentless pressure. It was during this dark period that an unexpected ally emerged, Lucinda. The letter arrived bearing Lucinda's handwriting, and Evelyn's first instinct was to burn it unread. Nothing Lucinda had to say could possibly be welcome, but curiosity overcame caution, and she broke the seal. Dear Evelyn, I write to you not as your cousin, for we were never truly that, but as a woman who has been forced to confront some uncomfortable truths about herself and her family. I owe you an apology that is long overdue. For years I watched my mother mistreat you and said nothing. Worse, I participated in that cruelty, taking pleasure in whatever small power I could exercise over someone I viewed as beneath me. I told myself you deserved such treatment, that your circumstances reflected some moral failing rather than mere accident of birth. The Duke's choice of you over me was a blow to my pride that I initially could not bear. I supported my mother's vengeful actions, convinced that your marriage was somehow an insult to our family rather than recognition of your worth. But watching from a distance as this drama has unfolded, I have been forced to see things differently. My mother's petition is not motivated by concern for you or by any legitimate legal grievance. It is pure spite, an old woman's inability to accept that she no longer controls you. I have tried to convince her to withdraw the complaint, but she refuses to listen, consumed by her need for revenge. I cannot undo the years of cruelty I inflicted upon you, Evelyn, but I can offer testimony in your favor when the magistrate hears my mother's petition. I can confirm that you were never coerced by the Duke, that our household was hostile to you, that you had every reason to seek escape. I can speak the truth, even though it means defying my mother and admitting my own failings. I do not expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But perhaps my testimony can help protect the happiness you have found. It is the least I can do to begin atoning for the pain I helped cause. Yours in regret, Lucinda Peaton Evelyn read the letter 3 times, scarcely able to believe its contents. Lucinda, offering to testify on her behalf. Lucinda, acknowledging the cruelty Evelyn had endured. It seemed too good to be true, and yet the letter's tone rang with genuine remorse. She showed it to Theodore that evening, and his reaction was cautiously hopeful. If she is sincere, her testimony would significantly strengthen our case. She was a witness to your treatment at Hartwell Manor, and her willingness to contradict her own mother would carry considerable weight with the magistrate. But what if it is a trap? Evelyn worried. What if Lady Peaton put her up to this, intending to use Lucinda's testimony against us somehow? It is possible, Theodore acknowledged, but I do not think so. This letter has a ring of authenticity that would be difficult to fake. Lucinda has always been vain and spoiled, but I never sensed true malice in her as I did in your aunt. Perhaps witnessing the consequences of her mother's spite has triggered a genuine crisis of conscience. After much discussion, Evelyn decided to accept Lucinda's offer, while remaining cautious about her motivations. She penned a carefully worded reply, expressing appreciation for the apology and willingness to hear Lucinda's testimony when the time came. The response was not long in coming. Lucinda wrote again, this time with more details about Lady Peaton's state of mind. According to her daughter, the older woman had become increasingly unstable, obsessed with destroying Evelyn's marriage to the point that it consumed her every waking thought. She had spent enormous sums hiring solicitors and investigators, attempting to find any evidence that might support her claims of coercion or invalidity. More troubling, Lucinda reported that Lady Peaton had been making inquiries about Evelyn's father, Lord Ashford. She seemed convinced that if she could locate him and convince him to support her petition, it would strengthen her case significantly. This news sent a chill through Evelyn. She had not thought of her father in months, had long since abandoned any hope that he might acknowledge her. But if Lady Peaton somehow convinced him to testify that Evelyn was mentally unfit or had been manipulated, it could indeed damage their defense. We need to find him first, Theodore decided. If your father can be convinced to speak truthfully about your circumstances, it might actually help rather than harm us. At the very least, we should know what he intends before your aunt gets to him. But locating Lord Ashford proved challenging. The man had apparently gone abroad years earlier, his exact whereabouts unknown to anyone Theodore's investigators could find. The search consumed weeks, and with each passing day, the date for the magistrate's hearing drew closer. Evelyn's anxiety manifested in increasingly severe physical symptoms. She could keep down little food, suffered constant fatigue, and experienced dizzy spells that terrified Theodore. He insisted she see a physician, despite her protests that it was merely stress. Dr. Harrison was a kindly man in his late 50s who had attended the Hawthorne family for decades. He conducted a thorough examination while Theodore paced anxiously in the hallway outside. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was carefully neutral. "Your Grace, might I speak with you and the Duchess together?" Theodore's face went white with fear. "Is she gravely ill? Tell me plainly, Harrison. I must know." "Let us speak together," the doctor repeated gently, gesturing Theodore back into the room. Evelyn sat propped against pillows, her face still pale but her eyes alert. She reached for Theodore's hand as he settled beside her on the bed, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. Dr. Harrison smiled at the gesture. "Your Grace, Duchess, I have good news. You are not ill. You are with child." The world seemed to stop. Evelyn stared at the doctor, certain she had misheard. "I am what?" "Pregnant," Dr. Harrison confirmed. "I would estimate you are approximately 3 months along, which would place the conception shortly after your wedding. Congratulations to you both." Theodore made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, pulling Evelyn into his arms with such force that the doctor cleared his throat in gentle warning. "Carefully, Your Grace. The Duchess needs rest and calm, not excessive excitement." But Theodore was beyond listening. He held Evelyn as though she were made of spun glass, his face buried in her hair, his shoulders shaking. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." Evelyn's own emotions were a chaotic tangle of joy and terror. A baby, Theodore's baby, growing inside her at this very moment. It was a miracle, a gift beyond measure. But it was also a complication that would make Lady Peaton's petition infinitely more dangerous. Dr. Harrison seemed to read her thoughts. "I must caution you both that the Duchess's condition makes the upcoming legal proceedings more delicate. Stress is harmful to both mother and child. If possible, this matter should be resolved quickly and with minimal upset." After the doctor left, Theodore and Evelyn sat together in silence, absorbing the news. Finally, Theodore spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "This changes everything. We must settle the petition immediately, before the pregnancy becomes common knowledge. If the magistrate even suspects your aunt's case might have merit, the implications for our child's legitimacy would be catastrophic." "I know," Evelyn said softly. "Theodore, perhaps Edmund was right. Perhaps I should withdraw from society, at least until the baby is born and the legal matters resolved. If I am not visible, people cannot talk about me." "Absolutely not," Theodore said fiercely. "You are my wife, the Duchess of Ashford, and the mother of my child. I will not have you hiding in shame as though you have something to be ashamed of. We face this together, publicly and proudly." But even as he spoke the words, Evelyn could see the fear in his eyes. Fear that their child would be born into scandal, that the marriage's validity would be questioned until it tainted everything they built together. The hearing before the magistrate was scheduled for 3 weeks hence. 3 weeks to prepare their defense, to gather evidence, to marshal every resource they possessed. 3 weeks that would determine whether Evelyn remained Theodore's wife or became merely another casualty of aristocratic prejudice. 3 weeks to fight for their family's future. That evening, as they lay together in their bed, Theodore's hand resting protectively on Evelyn's still flat stomach, he made a vow. "Whatever it takes," he whispered into the darkness. "Whatever I must do, whatever alliances I must forge or enemies I must make, I will protect you and our child. This I swear on my life and honor." Evelyn believed him, but she also understood that some battles could not be won through determination alone. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, she found herself praying to a God she had long questioned, begging for the strength to endure what was coming and the wisdom to protect the precious life growing within her. The storm was gathering, dark clouds on the horizon promising devastation. But Evelyn was no longer the frightened girl who had cowered in Hartwell Manor's shadows. She was the Duchess of Ashford, Theodore's wife, and the mother of his child, and she would fight with everything she had to protect her family. Part 3 of 3, 4,500 words. The 3 weeks before the hearing passed with agonizing slowness. Theodore's solicitors worked tirelessly, gathering depositions from everyone who had witnessed events at Hartwell Manor. Father Benedict provided a detailed account of Evelyn's state of mind during the emergency wedding ceremony, describing a young woman desperate to escape genuine danger, not one coerced by Theodore. The magistrate who had reviewed Theodore's emergency petition wrote a letter confirming that Evelyn's consent had been freely and clearly given. Even several of Hartwell Manor's servants came forward, willing to testify about the cruel treatment Evelyn had endured under Lady Peaton's roof. But the most surprising testimony came from an unexpected source entirely. 10 days before the hearing, a gentleman arrived at Ashford House requesting an audience with the Duke. He was elderly, perhaps 70, with silver hair and a face marked by the weight of years and regret. The butler announced him as Lord Marcus Ashford, Evelyn's father. Evelyn was in the library when Theodore came to fetch her, his expression carefully neutral. "Your father is here," he said quietly. "He wishes to speak with both of us. You need not see him if you do not wish it, Evelyn. I can send him away." Her heart pounded so loudly, she was certain Theodore must hear it. Her father, the man who had loved her mother in secret but abandoned them both when love proved inconvenient. The man who had never once inquired about his daughter's welfare or acknowledged her existence. He was here, in her home, requesting an audience as though he had any right to her time or attention. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to have him thrown from the property as Edmund had been. But beneath the anger and old hurt, curiosity stirred. Why had he come? What could he possibly have to say after a quarter-century of silence? "I will see him," Evelyn said, rising on unsteady legs. "But only if you remain with me, Theodore. I cannot face him alone." "I would not leave your side for anything," Theodore assured her, offering his arm. "Remember, you are the Duchess of Ashford now. You stand on equal footing with him or any other peer of the realm. He has no power over you." The words helped steady her as they descended to the drawing-room where Lord Ashford waited. He stood as they entered, and Evelyn was struck by how old he looked, how frail. In her imagination, her father had always been a figure of strength and power, someone whose rejection had defined her entire existence. But the reality was simply an elderly man whose face bore the marks of long regret. "Miss Ash," he began, then caught himself. "Your Grace, forgive me. I am unaccustomed to... That is, I never imagined..." He trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. "Lord Ashford," Evelyn said coolly, remaining standing though protocol suggested she should invite him to sit. "You requested this audience. I suggest you state your business quickly, as both the Duke and I have many pressing matters to attend to." Theodore's hand pressed supportively against her back, a silent reminder of his presence and support. Lord Ashford flinched at her cold tone, but nodded acceptance. "I deserve that and worse. Your Grace, I have come to offer my testimony in support of your marriage. I understand Lady Peaton is attempting to have it annulled on grounds of coercion and invalidity. I wish to prevent that injustice." "How remarkably convenient," Evelyn said, her voice sharp with bitterness she had suppressed for years. "You ignored my existence for 23 years, but now that I have married a duke, you suddenly wish to acknowledge me." "No," Lord Ashford said quietly. "Not convenient at all. Your Grace, I have no excuse for my failures as a father. I was a coward who chose social acceptance over honor, who let fear of scandal override every decent impulse. I abandoned the woman I loved and the daughter we created together. I have lived with that shame every day since your mother's death." "Shame did not prevent you from ignoring me," Evelyn pointed out. "Shame did not compel you to provide for my care or ensure my aunt treated me with kindness. Shame, it seems, is a very passive emotion when weighed against inconvenience." Lord Ashford's face crumpled, and for a horrifying moment, Evelyn thought he might weep. "You are correct in every accusation. I failed you utterly. But I am here now attempting to make whatever amends remain possible. Please, Your Grace, allow me to testify on your behalf. Let me do this one small thing to counter the decades of neglect." Theodore spoke for the first time, his voice hard. "Why now, Lord Ashford? Why, after all these years of silence, do you suddenly appear at precisely the moment when your testimony might prove useful to us?" "Because Lady Peaton approached me first," Lord Ashford admitted. "She found me in Bath, where I have been living quietly these past years. She demanded I testify that Evelyn was mentally unstable, that she had displayed troubling behavior from childhood that suggested she could not have consented freely to marriage. She wanted me to suggest that the Duke had taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman who lacked the capacity to make sound decisions. Evelyn's breath caught. So her aunt had succeeded in finding her father after all. The old terror rose up. What if he had agreed to Lady Peaton's demands? What if he stood before the magistrate and painted her as mentally deficient or unstable? "But you refused," Theodore said slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "I refused," Lord Ashford confirmed. "And more than that, I told Lady Peaton that if she proceeded with this malicious petition, I would testify against her. I would describe in detail how she treated Evelyn throughout her childhood, how she used my daughter as unpaid labor while denying her even basic familial affection. I would expose every cruelty, every calculated humiliation." He looked directly at Evelyn, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I failed to protect you when you were vulnerable and dependent on my help. I will not fail you now when I finally have the opportunity to make things right." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably. Evelyn felt Theodore's questioning gaze on her, leaving the decision entirely to her. She could refuse her father's help, send him away and never see him again. It would be justified, even righteous, to deny him the absolution he so clearly sought. But she found herself thinking of the child growing inside her, the son or daughter who would never know what it meant to be rejected by a parent. Could she afford to turn away help that might secure her baby's future, simply to punish a man who had already punished himself with years of regret? "Tell me about my mother," Evelyn said suddenly. "Not the version of events I pieced together from servants' gossip and my aunt's cruel implications. The truth." Lord Ashford sank into a chair uninvited, his composure cracking. "Your mother was the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Beautiful, yes, but that was the least of her qualities. She was intelligent, kind, gifted with a wisdom that saw through social pretense to the heart of matters. I was young, arrogant, certain that my rank and wealth made me superior to everyone around me. She taught me differently." His voice grew softer, lost in memory. "We met at a country fair. She was helping her father sell goods from his merchant business, and I was there with friends, slumming among the common folk for entertainment. But when I saw her, all thought of entertainment fled. I pursued her relentlessly, and eventually she consented to meet me in secret." "She loved you," Evelyn said, and it was not quite a question. "She loved me," Lord Ashford confirmed. "And God help me, I loved her with every fibre of my being. But I was weak. When my family discovered our relationship, when they threatened disinheritance and scandal, I folded like paper. I told myself I would wait, that I would find a way to marry her eventually once the immediate crisis passed. But waiting turned into cowardice, and cowardice became abandonment." "She died believing you would never claim me," Evelyn said, the old wound aching as though freshly inflicted. "Yes," Lord Ashford whispered. "And I have died a little more each day since, knowing I broke her heart and condemned our daughter to a life of shame and hardship. If I could go back, if I could make different choices." He shook his head. "But I cannot. All I can do is offer you what help I can now, inadequate though it may be." Evelyn looked at Theodore, seeking guidance. Her husband's expression was gentle, supportive, leaving the choice entirely to her. And in that moment of decision, Evelyn realized something profound. She could hold on to anger and resentment, could nurse the hurt of abandonment for the rest of her life, or she could choose differently, could break the cycle of bitterness that had poisoned so much of her existence. "Your testimony would be helpful," she said finally. "Not because I forgive you, that may never be possible, but because my child deserves every protection I can provide, including the testimony of their grandfather, absent though he has been." Lord Ashford's face transformed with hope and gratitude. "Thank you, Your Grace. Thank you for giving me this chance to do something right, however belatedly." The arrangements were made quickly. Lord Ashford would testify at the hearing, providing a detailed account of Evelyn's circumstances and Lady Peaton's treatment of her. His status as a peer and Evelyn's biological father would lend significant weight to his testimony. Theodore's solicitors were cautiously optimistic that with Lord Ashford's support added to their other evidence, Lady Peaton's petition would be dismissed decisively. But 2 days before the hearing, another complication emerged. Edmund appeared again, this time at the London townhouse where Theodore and Evelyn were staying to be near the magistrate's court. He brought with him several other members of the extended Hawthorne family, all bearing expressions of grave concern. "Theodore, we need to speak with you privately," Edmund said without preamble. "Family matters that require urgent discussion." "Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of my wife," Theodore replied coldly. Edmund's expression suggested he had expected this response. "Very well, Theodore, we are concerned that this legal proceeding will create a scandal from which the family name may never recover. We propose a compromise. Drop the legal fight. Allow the marriage to be annulled quietly. In exchange, we will provide Miss Ashford—" "The Duchess of Ashford," Theodore interrupted icily, "with a generous settlement, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. She can retire to the country, avoid society, and raise the child she is reportedly carrying in peace and comfort. You can remarry appropriately, and the scandal will gradually fade." Theodore's fury was a terrible thing to behold. "Get out," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Get out of my house before I have you thrown into the street like the garbage you are." "Be reasonable," Edmund pressed. "You have responsibilities to this family, to the title, to generations of Hawthorns who built this legacy through careful stewardship. One woman, however charming, is not worth destroying everything." "She is worth everything," Theodore said, and now his voice rose to a roar that made everyone flinch. "She is worth more than this entire family of vipers and social climbers. She is worth more than titles and estates, and the approval of small-minded aristocrats who measure worth by bloodlines rather than character. And I swear to you, Edmund, if you ever again suggest I abandon my wife and child, I will destroy you so thoroughly that no one will even remember your name." Edmund drew himself up, his face mottled with rage. "Then you leave us no choice. We will testify at the hearing ourselves. We will describe your obsessive behavior, your irrational attachment to an unsuitable woman, your disregard for duty and family responsibility. We will paint you as a man whose judgment has been compromised, who cannot be trusted to manage his own affairs, let alone a dukedom." "Do your worst," Theodore challenged, "but understand this, when the magistrate dismisses Lady Peaton's petition, as he will, every one of you who testified against me will be cut off from the family entirely. No more allowances, no more use of family properties or influence, no more trading on the Hawthorne name for social advantage. You will be as dead to me as though you had never been born." The threat hung in the air like a sword. Several of Edmund's companions shifted uncomfortably, clearly reconsidering their participation in this confrontation, but Edmund himself merely smiled coldly. "We shall see who emerges victorious, cousin. Family has always been more important than individual desire. You may learn that lesson too late to save yourself." They left in a storm of barely suppressed fury, and Evelyn found herself trembling with reaction. Theodore pulled her into his arms, his own body taut with rage. "They cannot win," he said fiercely. "We have truth on our side and justice, and more evidence than they can possibly counter. This is desperation, a final attempt to intimidate us into surrender." "But what if they succeed?" Evelyn whispered against his chest. "What if the magistrate believes their testimony, decides you are unfit to manage your own affairs?" "Then we appeal," Theodore said simply. "We take the case to higher courts, all the way to the House of Lords if necessary. I will not stop fighting, Evelyn. Not ever." The day of the hearing dawned cold and grey, matching Evelyn's apprehension. She dressed carefully in a modest but elegant gown that Philippa had helped select, dark blue silk that conveyed dignity without ostentation. Her pregnancy was not yet visible, but she felt intensely protective of the life growing within her, one hand often drifting unconsciously to her stomach. The magistrate's court was crowded with spectators, society having turned out in force to witness the scandalous hearing. Evelyn held her head high as she entered on Theodore's arm, refusing to show the fear churning inside her. She saw her aunt across the room, Lady Peaton's face twisted with vindictive triumph. Beside her sat Edmund and his supporters, their expressions coldly satisfied. But Evelyn also saw allies. Philippa had claimed a prominent seat, her presence a clear statement of support. Mrs. Dawson sat nearby, her weathered face creased with worry, but also with determination. Lucinda was there as well, seated apart from her mother, her expression nervous but resolute, and in the back corner, Lord Ashford waited, his elderly face grave but committed. The magistrate entered, and the proceedings began. Lady Peaton's solicitor presented his case with practiced eloquence. He painted Theodore as an impulsive man who had allowed infatuation to override judgment. He described Evelyn as a vulnerable young woman who had been swept up in events beyond her control, unable to truly consent to a marriage that had happened with shocking rapidity. He suggested that Theodore's emergency petition had been based on exaggerated or fabricated danger, designed to circumvent proper courtship procedures and Lady Peaton's rightful authority as Evelyn's guardian. Edmund and his supporters testified to Theodore's irrational obsession with Evelyn, describing his threats against family members who had merely expressed concern. They painted a picture of a duke whose judgment had been compromised, who was unfit to make sound decisions about marriage or anything else. Evelyn watched Theodore's face grow progressively darker as his own family betrayed him publicly. She squeezed his hand, offering what comfort she could, but she could feel his fury radiating like heat. Then it was their turn to present evidence. Theodore's solicitor methodically destroyed Lady Peaton's case. He presented Father Benedict's testimony about Evelyn's clear consent and evident relief at escaping Hartwell Manor. He showed the magistrate's letter confirming that Evelyn had been in genuine danger. He called servants from Hartwell Manor, who described in painful detail the cruelty and contempt with which Lady Peaton had treated her niece for decades. Mrs. Dawson testified with quiet authority, describing Evelyn's intelligence, strength, and complete capacity to make her own decisions. Philippa spoke to Evelyn's successful transition to her role as Duchess, her dedication to learning, and her evident love for Theodore. Then Lucinda took the stand. Her mother's face went white with shock and betrayal as Lucinda began to speak. In a trembling but determined voice, she described growing up watching Evelyn's systematic humiliation. She admitted her own participation in that cruelty, her jealousy and resentment of the cousin who had always been treated as lesser. She confirmed that Theodore had never coerced Evelyn, that the emergency wedding had been necessary to prevent Lady Peaton from forcing Evelyn into a harmful situation. "My mother is not concerned about Evelyn's welfare," Lucinda said clearly. "She never has been. This petition is pure vengeance because Evelyn dared to escape her control and marry above the station my mother had assigned to her. It is malicious, baseless, and should be dismissed immediately." Lady Peaton leapt to her feet, shrieking accusations of betrayal and ingratitude. The magistrate had to call for order, threatening to have her removed from the court if she could not control herself. Finally, Lord Ashford testified. He spoke with the authority of a peer and the regret of a father who had failed his child. He described Evelyn's intelligence and strength, her years of silent suffering, her complete capacity for independent thought and decision. He confirmed that Theodore had not coerced her, that she had chosen her husband freely and wisely. And then he did something unexpected. He publicly acknowledged Evelyn as his daughter, formally and for the record. "I have spent 23 years running from the responsibility I owed to this extraordinary young woman," he said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "I abandoned her to poverty and contempt when I should have claimed her proudly. That failure has haunted me every day of my life, but I will not fail her again. Evelyn Hawthorne, Duchess of Ashford, is my daughter. I claim her now, publicly and without reservation, and I say with absolute certainty that she is more than capable of choosing her own husband and managing her own life. Any suggestion otherwise is an insult to a woman of remarkable intelligence and strength." Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face. She had not realized how much she needed to hear those words, how deeply the wound of abandonment had cut. Theodore's arm came around her shoulders, holding her steady as her father finally, belatedly, claimed her as his own. The magistrate called for a brief recess to consider the evidence. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Evelyn sat with Theodore, their hands clasped so tightly that both their knuckles showed white. Around them, their supporters waited with visible tension. When the magistrate returned, his expression was stern. "I have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties," he began. "Lady Peaton's petition alleges that the marriage between Theodore Hawthorne, Duke of Ashford, and Evelyn Ashford was contracted under coercion and without proper consent. Having heard extensive testimony from numerous witnesses, I find these allegations to be entirely without merit." Lady Peaton made a strangled sound of protest, but the magistrate silenced her with a look. "The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Miss Ashford, now the Duchess of Ashford, consented freely and enthusiastically to this marriage. Multiple credible witnesses have testified to her clear understanding of her choice and her evident happiness with that choice. The emergency circumstances that necessitated the rapid wedding have been thoroughly documented and justified." He turned his stern gaze on Lady Peaton. "Furthermore, I find that this petition was brought not out of genuine concern for the Duchess's welfare, but out of vindictive spite. Lady Peaton's treatment of her niece, as described by multiple witnesses, was cruel and exploitative. The Duchess had every reason to seek escape from such circumstances, and the Duke provided an honourable solution." His voice hardened. "This court does not look favourably upon frivolous petitions brought for malicious purposes. Lady Peaton, I hereby dismiss your petition in its entirety. The marriage between the Duke and Duchess of Ashford is valid and shall remain so. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay all legal costs associated with this proceeding, including the Duke's expenses in defending against your baseless accusations." The courtroom erupted. Lady Peaton screamed accusations and curses until bailiffs escorted her bodily from the room. Edmund and his supporters slipped away quietly, their faces dark with defeat. But Evelyn heard none of it. She turned to Theodore, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her with fierce protectiveness as relief crashed over them both in overwhelming waves. They had won. The marriage was secure, their child's legitimacy protected, their future safeguarded. Around them, their supporters celebrated. Philippa's satisfied smile suggested she had never doubted the outcome. Mrs. Dawson wept openly with joy. Lucinda approached hesitantly, offering a tremulous smile that Evelyn returned with cautious warmth, and Lord Ashford stood at a distance, his face wet with tears, waiting to see if his daughter might grant him a moment of her time. Later, much later, after the celebrations had concluded and they had returned to the townhouse, Evelyn and Theodore lay together in their bed, both still processing everything that had happened. "It's over," Evelyn whispered, scarcely able to believe it. "We're safe." "We're safe," Theodore confirmed, his hand resting protectively on her stomach where their child grew. "And we're together, as we were always meant to be." "I saw my father after the hearing," Evelyn admitted. "He asked if he might write to me occasionally, if he might be permitted to know his grandchild. I told him I would consider it." "And will you?" Theodore asked gently. "Perhaps," Evelyn said slowly. "Not forgiveness, not immediately, but maybe eventually some form of relationship. He stood up for me today when it mattered. That must count for something." "Whatever you decide, I support," Theodore assured her. "Just as I support whatever you choose to do about Lucinda. I noticed you speaking with her after the hearing." "She apologized again," Evelyn said, "more sincerely than I expected. I think witnessing her mother's vindictiveness shocked her, made her see things differently. I don't know if we'll ever be close, but perhaps we need not be enemies." "You have a generous heart," Theodore observed, "more generous than most people in your circumstances would possess." "I have been given so much," Evelyn replied softly. "You, our child, this beautiful life. How can I hold on to bitterness when I have been blessed with such abundance?" Theodore kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You are remarkable. Have I mentioned that recently?" "Not in the past hour," Evelyn teased, some of her natural lightness returning now that the shadow of the hearing had passed. "Then I'm remiss," Theodore said seriously. "Evelyn Hawthorne, Duchess of Ashford, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. You faced down your aunt's cruelty, society's prejudice, and my family's opposition with courage and grace that leaves me in awe. You survived circumstances that would have destroyed lesser people, and emerged with your spirit intact and your capacity for love undiminished. I am honored beyond measure to be your husband, and I will spend the rest of my life striving to be worthy of the gift you have given me." "The gift I gave you?" Evelyn questioned. "Theodore, you saved me. You gave me everything: status, security, love. What have I given you in return?" "Purpose," Theodore said simply. "Meaning. You showed me that love matters more than duty, that honor means protecting the vulnerable rather than preserving social hierarchies. You taught me that true nobility lies in character, not bloodlines, and you gave me hope that despite all the ugliness in this world, beauty and goodness still exist and are worth fighting for." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had found each other across impossible distance and against overwhelming odds. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges ahead. Society's judgment would not disappear overnight, and Theodore's estrangement from Edmund and other family members would create ongoing complications. But they would face those challenges together, as they had faced everything else. And with their child soon to arrive, they would build a family founded on love rather than obligation, on acceptance rather than judgment. 5 months later, Evelyn gave birth to a healthy son whom they named Marcus Benedict Hawthorne, honoring both her father and the priest who had performed their emergency wedding. Lord Ashford wept when he held his grandson for the first time, overcome by the grace of a daughter who had granted him access to a joy he had forfeited through his own cowardice. Lucinda became an unexpected ally, gradually rebuilding trust with Evelyn through consistent effort and genuine remorse for past cruelty. Lady Peaton, bankrupted by legal costs and ostracized by society for her vindictive actions, retreated to a small cottage where she lived out her remaining years in bitter isolation. Edmund and his supporters found themselves cut off from the family entirely, just as Theodore had promised. Without access to the Hawthorne name and resources, their own social standing declined precipitously. It was a harsh lesson in the cost of betraying family loyalty. But for Evelyn and Theodore, life blossomed into something more beautiful than either had dared imagine. They divided their time between Ashford House and London, raising their son with love and laughter, eventually welcoming 2 more children, a daughter named Catherine and another son named Edmund, chosen deliberately to reclaim the name from its association with betrayal. Evelyn grew into her role as Duchess with grace and confidence, using her position to advocate for improved conditions for servants and better treatment of children born outside marriage. She established schools and charitable organizations, determined that no child should suffer the contempt and neglect she had endured. And through it all, Theodore remained her constant companion and supporter, the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had valued her when she was deemed worthless, who had loved her when love seemed impossible. Their story became legend in society, the scandalous Duke who had married his hostess's poor relation, defying convention and family to claim the woman he loved. Some viewed it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of following one's heart, but others saw it differently, as proof that love could transcend social boundaries, that worth was not determined by birth, and that courage and determination could triumph over even the most entrenched prejudice. Years later, when their children were grown and their own hair had turned silver, Evelyn and Theodore would walk the gardens of Ashford House hand in hand, remembering the journey that had brought them together. The rose garden remained her favorite place, where she had first dared to hope that her life might hold more than shadows and service. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Theodore one autumn evening as they watched the sun set over their estate. "The scandal, the estrangement from family, all the complications our marriage created?" Theodore pulled her close, his arms still strong despite his advancing years. "My only regret," he said softly, "is that I did not find you sooner. Every moment we have shared, every challenge we have faced, every joy we have celebrated, all of it has been worthwhile. You are the great love of my life, Evelyn. You always have been, from that first moment in the kitchen when our eyes met and the world changed forever." Evelyn rested her head against his shoulder, content in the truth of those words. They had faced darkness and emerged into light. They had been tested and proven strong. And they had built a life together that honored the love that had sparked between them on that fateful night so many years ago. It was, she thought, more than she had ever dreamed possible. and it was perfect. The end. Dear listeners, thank you for joining us on Evelyn and Theodore's extraordinary journey from scandal to triumph, from doubt to certainty, from shadows to light. Their love story reminds us that true worth lies in character rather than circumstance, and that courage and compassion can overcome even the most daunting obstacles. If you enjoyed this historical romance, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment sharing your favorite moment from the story, and hit that like button to help others discover echoes of romance. Don't forget to activate your notifications so you never miss our next tale of love, drama, and triumph over adversity. Until next time, may your own love story be filled with the courage to defy convention, the strength to weather storms, and the joy of finding someone who sees your true worth. With love and gratitude, echoes of romance.